Putin goes ballistic in Syria, obliterates the USA's secret Mideast strategy. The primary Anglo-American strategy in the Middle East was just destroyed. By State of the Nation 2012.com. In case you haven't noticed, something quite extraordinary and magical just happened in the Middle East. Russia's military has not only turned the tide in Syria, in just a few days' time, President Putin has decisively subverted a long-standing Anglo-American scheme to create the Greater Israel. The complete annihilation of ISIS, aka the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, is central to Putin's geopolitical response to the rapidly unfolding agenda that was being executed by the Anglo-American Axis, AAA, throughout the Mideast. The Russian counterattacks are now being carried out with great forethought and subtle strategy. Sun Tzu would be quite proud of his 21st-century students in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Many an armchair geopolitical analyst has sat and wondered how long before Russia would intervene to stop the unprecedented slaughter in and mass exodus from Syria. Putin's abiding strategy of non-involvement was incomprehensible. Until now. In order to prove to the world community of nations that the USA, UK, France, Saudi Arabia and Israel, in particular, were only playing an extremely dangerous and deadly game, Putin had to give them all, the Anglo-American Axis nations, some rope. Actually, they have been given an unusually long rope since the very beginning of the manufactured Syrian civil war by the AAA that began in the spring of 2011. The Kremlin quite wisely determined that the neocon strategists in Chicago required a sufficiently long rope for the gallows that they have been painstakingly building for themselves. Please consult the following essay in order to fully understand the vital Chicago connection. The plan for a Greater Israel unveiled and obliterated. Retired four-star General Wesley Clark has given a number of interviews over the years in which he has revealed a covert plan whereby the U.S. will attack 7 countries in 5 years. The context was always the Middle East, and the 7 countries were Iraq, and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan and, finishing off, Iran. In each case, Clark appears to be unaware that he was unwittingly exposing the essence of a clandestine scheme known in some circles as the Greater Israel Project. Hence, because of his rather indiscreet and cavalier public sharing of this highly classified information, he was removed from his leadership positions and eventually forced to resign from the U.S. Army. What follows is General Clark's stunning revelation word for word, so I came back to see him a few weeks later. And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk. He picked up a piece of paper. And he said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office, today. And he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan and, finishing off, Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you." General Wesley Clark, the Russian Ministry of Defense, says it is intensifying its air campaign in Syria after a series of successful airstrikes against the Islamic State. Gross miscalculation by the neocons about Russia's non-intercession. The neocon strategy for total Mideast domination hinged upon one key premise. They wrongfully assumed that Russia would never permit its military to become embroiled in wars in the Middle East. And that the Kremlin would be extra special careful not to incite Islamic jihadism as a direct result of any kind of military involvement in that region. The Russian motherland is an enormous geographic area, and cost-effectively defending its borders against Muslim terrorists is virtually impossible. Chechnya was a graphic example of the Western powers using mercenary proxies from Muslim and Arab nations to harass Russia at its fringes. There are a couple of more critical quotes excerpted below from General Clark's talks which can also be heard in the video posted below. This particular interview captures the essence of Israel's master plan to essentially conquer the whole Middle East. Clark is basically parroting previous neocon DoD secretaries, deputy secretaries and undersecretaries who carelessly disclosed this ongoing neocon conspiracy to him. But one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. We've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes, Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. Although General Clark refers to the Mideast conquest by the U.S. military, it ought to be understood that these illicit wars of aggression have been advanced in the interest of establishing the Greater Israel. In other words, much of U.S. foreign policy revolves around securing Israel's domination of the Middle East. The preceding statements by General Clark specifically reflect information given to him by Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, who served under George W. Bush, at the Pentagon after 9/11. Wolfowitz was one of the key architects of America's declared war on terror, and especially of the wars waged against Afghanistan and Iraq. Both of these quotes illustrate the fateful underestimation by the neocons of Russian resolve and purpose. They especially represent the extent to which the AAA wrongly assessed the Kremlin's determination to project military power in the defense of the powerless peoples of Syria, and particularly the defenseless Christian communities. Here is the quote again, as the profound neocon faux pas is well worth repeating since it is the very basis of their Greater Israel debacle. The obvious question is, how did they get it so very wrong? Because they are still steeped in Cold War mentality. Their premise was likely accurate when assessing the old guard reactions of the Soviet Union. However, President Vladimir Putin, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu et al. Possess a consciousness that is far removed from the Soviet Cold Warriors of yesteryear. But one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. Russia's moral ascendancy and military prowess are now unquestioned. Putin's Russia has now shown itself to be the savior of Christians living in the Middle East. Putin has also proven to be a loyal friend of President Bashar al-Assad. President Putin's peace initiative in Syria in 2013 also serves as a testament to this. Only Russia possessed the necessary military strength and nuclear weapon deterrence to confront the AAA in Syria. And confront them they did by way of a crushing aerial blitzkrieg. In so doing, Russia has forever exposed the crazy neocon and Zionist conspiracy to rule the Mideast through an ever-evolving Greater Israel. Were it not for Russia, the Middle East would have already been completely taken over by Zionist zealots in the form of so many terrorist groups secretly supported by Israel. Likewise, Russia's support of the Iranian government has provided a countervailing force to those Arab Sunni states that would like to topple every Shiite government throughout the region. The wars and conflicts between Shiites and Sunnis are being relentlessly exacerbated by the AAA client states. Israel, in particular, has once again thrown fuel on this raging fire so that it will surely turn into a regional conflagration. The following account of Israel's perfidy is quite shocking for both its savagery and inconceivable offense to the most sacred of Islamic religious traditions. Saudi Arabia colluded with Mossad, triggered Hajj stampede to kidnap Iranian officials and Revolutionary Guards. Because of egregious assaults like these, it is quite likely that the whole Middle East may explode into a modern-day version of Armageddon. Much of the region has already been transformed into a dystopian, post-apocalyptic wasteland by the AAA and its many mercenary proxies and controlled terrorist groups. Truly, the exceedingly misguided Zio-Anglo-American strategy to fabricate a Greater Israel has certainly set the world up for the Great Tribulation. After all, it has often been predicted that, as the Middle East goes, so goes the rest of the world. Putin's Russia has forever outed the Greater Israel conspiracy. Now that this cat is out of the bag, it can never be put back in. No matter how Israel tries to spin its nefarious plot to take over the Middle East, their creation and covert support of ISIS has been revealed for all to see. Russia's bombing of ISIL back into the Stone Age has shown just how fraudulent the US-led coalition has been since its very inception. The American and French airstrikes never even touched these military positions over many months of sorties. Israel never even felt it was necessary to provide the fake coalition with cover until the Russian bombardment recently commenced. Only then did the Israeli government declare the first ISIS terror cell was found within Israel's borders. That's how fully confident the Anglo-American co-conspirators were that Russia would stay safely on the sidelines. This highly consequential and gross miscalculation has irreparably damaged their entire Greater Israel blueprint and consigned it to the trash bin of history. On cue, Israel suddenly claims to uncover first suspected ISIS cell. Only through Russian military operations in Syria was the fraudulent AAA fiasco of fake military operations against the ISIS terror groups laid bare. Clearly, the Anglo-American Axis got caught with its pants down in a way never seen before. Russian bombardiers still have the US-led coalition trousers pulled down to their ankles by virtue of their sweeping military successes throughout the northern Levant region. One wonders just how long the coalition of the frauds will tolerate such humiliating exposure. Conclusion: Putin's Russia has certainly arrived in the nick of time in Syria. Hopefully, the Russians will finish off the AAA-sponsored terrorist groups throughout Iraq, and beyond. Only by going ballistic has Putin been able to fight fire with a much bigger fire, as in massive firepower. There are times when terrorism must be met with a force so fierce and formidable that it will never rear its ugly head again. There is perhaps no better example on planet Earth for how to respond to a bully in your neighborhood than the Russians' ongoing shock and awe campaign against ISIS. Russia is serving as a glowing example regarding how to best respond to any incorrigible and violent bully. The world has been terrorized long enough by these bad actors. Perhaps it is now time to rid the planet of characters that are so intractably hellbent on destroying the global village. If ever there was a righteous leader and strong nation which was capable of such a courageous feat, Putin's Russia is it. State of the Nation, October 11, 2015. Author's note: many have had a hard time embracing President Vladimir Putin's benevolent role within the world community of nations. They now point to his use of overwhelming force against ISIS as an example of his warmongering. This type of obvious propaganda has been disseminated by the Anglo-American strategists whose plans for a greater Israel have been thoroughly annihilated.